is basically, I forgot my microphone. But the goal of today is basically to go over my experiences, um, and the multiple times that I've had to do this in order to come up with all of these experiences that I've shared. So, as of today, I am officially uploading and finishing the part two, um, the the phytoplankton guide. If you decide to go to culture phytoplankton, there's actually a lot of things that you need to be careful of and you need to know before you are successful. And I want everybody to have success, basically. And if you go to the trouble of ordering phytoplankton, going through and culturing them, you might as well get as much information as you can from me before you actually do it. So I know there were some viewers waiting, so now I think they're here. So let's see. You are welcome to type any questions that you have in the chat box. So let's get started. So originally, I had this plan to start breeding because for me, I hadn't even kept Amano shrimp at that time, and while I was doing my research into this shrimp, I just found it very fascinating that there's so many people out there pushing for people to keep these shrimp, but very little on actually breeding them. And I'm sure you guys can understand that sort of problem. And so looking back, I sort of started to want to keep this shrimp precisely to number one, have it in my tank, but also to look into, what are the problems that people run into with breeding. And there was a lot of information talking about brackish water, things, and people had the general idea of how to breed these shrimps down. They knew that the shrimp spent a portion of their life in salt water, and I don't really know where that information came from, but most likely, because it is a shrimp that is native to Japan and Taiwan, most likely the biologists in that area have done a lot of research, or people go out there who collect these Amano shrimps from the wild for the aquarium hobby probably looked into it, especially if the government might say something about making sure the population is high enough for so many people to collect. So there's one article out there, basically Hayashi Hamano in 1984 wrote a little bit about that. I've talked about this article before, um, but it was the one article that I could find. And later down the line, I found another article. Um, it's where they talked about rotifers plus um, live cultured tetraselmis is how they were managed to raise them all up pretty well at 25, 24, 25 parts per thousand salinity. So it was a little different than what Hayashi and Hamano said, because they said that 17 parts per thousand rice bran um, plus like artificial food was the best way, and they actually failed growing the Amano shrimps with rotifers and algae. Whereas this is a recent article, 2020 article about this about rotifers and tetraselmis. So reading that, I actually found that second article already part of as I was going through my project. So let me share with you the story of the first time that I did it. And the first time, it was actually a lot of the footage from part one um, was the first time I did it. And by the time part one was released, I already got the shrimps to go to, like they were already transformed and everything. And I was quite unsatisfied with my yield, because in the end I had like 8 shrimps transform, and it was not to me, it didn't feel like a success. So over the next couple of months, I've just been trying really hard to increase my yields. And if you've already seen part one, you know what I did. I started by making sure the female was buried. I um, in the tanks, I had 24-hour light using seawater that my friend actually got from the ocean. So you know I knew my friend was going, and I was like, you don't have to bring me anything if you don't want to, but if you have the time, please, please, I would love a lemonade bottle or just a bottle of seawater. And it was like it was the weirdest request I've ever made to somebody, to say, hey, you're going to go to the ocean and get me some water from it. Um, Luckily, my friend did it, and she had fish. So she kind of understands like the crazy amounts of weird things that fish lovers will do for their fish. And so like it was okay. So I got it. I did the 14-hour or 14-day uh putting it outside. The salinity actually went up to like 40 something one day when I just forgot about it. And then that's when I realized, like, hey, I actually have to watch the salinity in this bottle, because it'll it'll evaporate. And I had it in a glass jar with the top off, just in case of anything. Like, I didn't want the temperature to heat up too much. So that was the first time. And then I put the babies in 3 to 5, and I'm actually looking at my notes here, but I'm looking at the babies, uh, put them in for 3 to 5 minutes acclimation. And then I realized, like, later down the line, that I didn't actually need to acclimate them. I can just go ahead and put them in immediately, and you don't really need any of that. So after that, that first time we got to, I think, 14, no, day 5. And that was when there was a big bottleneck from like 5 to 7, and then 7 to 8, 10, like those couple of days. There's a big bottleneck where the amount of shrimps that I had just dropped immensely. I went from like a couple hundred of it, and then down and down and down and down to maybe about like 100 overall. And looking back, I'm pretty confident that it was because I didn't have enough food, no phytoplankton, and just a very thin layer of algae and diatoms at the very bottom. So looking back, that was probably why. And in the next couple of times I've tried, I've realized that in the very beginning, these babies are developing their GI tract, right? And then as they get from day 2 on to about day 7, that's when they're really um, trying to get as much nutrients as possible to molt. And then the more times they molt from around stage 3 onwards, they actually get bigger. So in the beginning, they're actually developing their organ systems, and then later on, then they start focusing on growing bigger. So let's see. So that entire time, I had the 24-hour light, I had the filter on, and it worked. It was eight some transformed into post larvae, but I had problems with transferring them into fresh water, because that stage, it was like, people say 50% every day, and you keep them in the cups for 3 or 4 days until you're almost done and it's almost fresh water. The, the issue that I had with that was I was changing water, or basically I had like a cup and then had some salt water from the tank, and then I would double the volume every time and I just pour it in. But the problem with that was it was too stressful in terms of the salinity changes every time. So later, I realized, like, you actually have to drip acclimate these shrimp. You have to drip acclimate the fresh water in, and to keep it safe, I started doing like 12 to 24-hour drip acclimation, and then until the very end, where you end up with less than 5 parts per thousand each time. So so that is actually a lot more successful than doing 50% water changes every single day and just pouring fresh water in. Looking back, like I'm kind of like, how did I not realize that putting so much fresh water in and changing the salinity so fast can be detrimental to the shrimp? Like looking back, I'm just like, Ryan, you're so dumb. Like, obviously, it's going to be a problem if you just dumped all that fresh water in. But you live and you learn, and you know, you you learn that the hard way the first time, and you'll never forget it. So the next couple of times, my goal was to ensure that whenever the females hatched out or hatched their eggs, like I wanted to learn about what makes them tick, what triggers them to let go of their babies. Because I realized like sometimes you would get females who just let go of all their babies all at the time. They all hatched out and everybody's happy. And it's like the best feeling ever because you can just dump all these little probably zoas into the culture grow out container and you're fine. But other times you get like maybe like 100 that are actually hatched out in the water as the current is swirling, and then the rest are all still eggs and the female just drops them like she doesn't care about them anymore. So I was figuring out like what makes the female decide what to do. And so there were two factors that I found in the beginning. It was number one, time. If your shrimps aren't mature enough to hatch out, they won't hatch out, obviously, right? But the second thing is it actually depends on the female too. If she's feeling like um, all the conditions are right, she will usually use her little, hands and pry the eggs off and help them hatch. Whereas if you did not have that female doing that, what happens is the females will just kick it out or take it out from under her swimmerets and then leave it on the bottom. And what happens is you still get them to hatch out over the next couple of days, but the hatch rate is very, very low. And so after that, I looked at the hatch rates compared with the how long I let the females incubate the eggs, and it turns out the ideal time is around 14 days, and with early as about 12 days, up to maybe like 17, almost 20 days. And if you were to just do a Google check or just Google how long it takes for Amano shrimps to incubate their eggs, people say 3 to 5 weeks. Now, I'm personally thinking that either they're just repeating something they heard, or what happens is if you naturally keep the female in the tank and you don't even worry about breeding them and stopping the babies from coming out in the community tank, the females in nature probably have some sort of say, and because they have to use that mechanical way to help the babies hatch, the females can probably hold on to the eggs even after the eggs are ready to develop for quite some time, looking for the perfect opportunity to let the babies go. Right. Now, this is all just speculation, me trying to figure out, like, maybe this is the way things are. And of course, I'm not based in Japan. I can't go outside and like look at these things in the wild. I would love to, but I can't. Um, so those are the couple of times, and I didn't have phytoplankton back then. I didn't want to spend the money and the time and the energy to set up another phytoplankton culture. And I've tried feeding with yeast. I tried feeding with a lot of flake foods, and every time that I start feeding these things, my culture would disappear overnight. And I'm just like, okay, what is going on? I check the ammonia levels, I check the pH and everything, and it's like within reason, right? There's still ammonia in there, but it's not like super bad. Um, so I didn't know what was going on until after a while. I was like, hey, why don't we put this under the microscope um, and see what's going on? So I see a lot of dead shrimps on the bottom of the container, um, and I realized that the ones that are still alive, they're barely alive, but they are alive. They have these weird little growths on them, or things that are connected, or like stuck onto the shells of the shrimp. And so I began to think, like, maybe it's because I'm feeding too much food or the wrong type of food. And because of that, these babies are getting attacked by the bacteria that end up blooming from feeding these foods that the babies aren't consuming and just falling to the bottom. And my filter can't handle that. So at that point, I was like, okay, I'm already invested. I need to look for other ways. And at that point, that was when I was like, okay, I got to get phytoplankton now. And so that's why you realize in part one, I'm just like, you don't need phytoplankton. You just do the 14 days outside. It'll grow its own algae. It's fine, whatever. And then in part two, which is dropping tonight or tomorrow, you'll realize that I'm a proponent of phytoplankton, because as I got phytoplankton, I realized that all my problems in the beginning, where I had all these die-offs, around day 5 to 10, it significantly reduced the number of deaths that I had during that time. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I just hit like a very important point. I hit a gold mine, and that was when I actually got more shrimps. And originally I started with just two shrimp, one pair, and I got more shrimps. I put more energy into it, and I started culturing the phytoplankton. And I got my phytoplankton on Amazon. It was like Mercer of Montana Tetraselmis. And when I was looking at the two different Nanochloropsis versus Tetras, I chose Tetraselmis because it's a little bit bigger. It can move around the water. In Nanochloropsis, although it's able to adapt to more different ranges of salinity better than the Tetraselmis was, the nanos were going to settle to the bottom if I didn't have enough aeration, and I couldn't make the culture container go as fast as it can with the bubbles. And so I chose Tetraselmis. Hopefully, since they're motile, they have flagella, they can stay in the water a little bit better. Um, and then after that, I was like, okay, from now on, I'm starting all of my tanks, or starting all of my batches with phytoplankton. And then, so I got the first week or so down pretty well. We increased our yields. And then at that point, I ran into the problem of another die off from day 10 on to about 15, day 10 to 15. I'm just like, what could possibly be wrong now? I'm watching the bottom of my container, making sure that no dead algae or anything is on the bottom. And so at that point, I was like, okay, maybe I need to look into other types of shrimp, because there are no Amano shrimp videos out there talking about using phytoplankton, but there are plenty of research that has been done on keeping and aquaculturing shrimp for consumption. Right? People eat a lot of shrimp, and shrimp farming is a very, very big business. So of course there's going to be tons of data out there. And then I realized, like, okay, so these shrimp um, farmers, they are starting their shrimp babies, and this is not a mono shrimp anymore. This is like white shrimp or whatever you get at the grocery store, and prawns, but they're starting it out on phytoplankton. And then as the shrimp progresses, they're changing their foods, going from phytoplankton onto more bigger, larger foods with a different nutritional profile. And most of the time, they're getting more fats, more proteins as the shrimp grows larger. And so I'm like, okay, I need to figure out when is the exact time I need to start feeding this fish food, or crushed flakes and powders, because now I think I know why the shrimp might need a different nutrition as they progress. And of course, that makes so much sense now. Thinking back, I'm like, in the very beginning, they're planktonic and they float around, but later they have much more developed swimming systems and organ systems, and they probably can eat better things. And so it was a big fight between the past experiences that I had of, as every time I added all of these artificial foods, it was it had been really bad for my shrimps. And so I had to figure out what was the exact or the best dosing feeding schedule with these artificial foods. And so what I arrived at was you would feed as little as possible every time and then just feed more more times. Sorry. So feed frequency, increase the frequency, but feed a little at a time. Um, of course, this is like every time I have a problem or every time I'm trying to think of a solution, this is like week after week after week, right? Every time there's a problem, I lose the batch, I have to start again. And so that's why it takes so long for me to figure out things because I don't have more than one setup that I can do at a time. And that's what I like about having more and more people interested in this because then they can go on to one person might be interested in what are the salinity differences between 17 and 35. Other people are thinking about what kind of things can I feed or what kind of temperature is it? How big does the container have to be? And that is the magic of sharing your information with the world. People can build off of your experiences, right? So what I decided was I was going to feed Hikari first bites, the powder food, and starting from around day 9 or 10, um, actually I started out like day 8, and then day 8, 9, 10, and then from then on, I realized like, okay, I'm actually onto something now. I got past day 10, the bottleneck at day 10, but on day 14, there was a problem. All of the shrimp died at the same time. And I was just like, okay, I know that I can increase the survival time now by a couple more days if I feed food every single day. But on day 14, they all died. And there's a difference between your shrimps dying one at a time or losing a little bit every day, and then versus losing all of them at the same time. All of them at the same time tells you that there's a problem with your water quality or your, whether it's temperature, the whatever you might have a problem with the water. Losing it a couple every day over the course of like 3 to 4 days is telling you you're not feeding well or there's something in their development that you're not doing because obviously something who with the bad water quality affects everyone, all the shrimp in the tank. But if it's starvation, some shrimp are going to hold on a little bit longer than the others, right? So I started losing all of these shrimps and I was like, what could possibly be wrong now? All at the same time, they're all losing, I'm losing all the shrimps at the same time. It must be something with the water. And then I was like, okay, thinking back to my previous experiments, I feed very little, but probably it's accumulating over the course of those couple of days. Hi, Chevy Fish. Well, as long as you're here, I'm glad. Thank you guys so much for the support. I just have to say, like, you guys liking my videos and you guys giving me this attention for my videos to go out and affect more people, that's what makes me want to do all of these live streams, all of these videos, all of these experiments. Because after like the fifth time that you lose a batch of shrimps, you start thinking like maybe people aren't doing it for a reason. Maybe people never tried more than 5 times and you want to quit too. But after people start having success or people start emailing me their experiments, and I'm just like, okay, I'm getting people thinking, how can I get them more information? What can I do to help? And so from that point on, if you guys keep supporting me, that's really what makes me want to finish what I started. So Chevy Fish says, what about the organisms as food in green water? Um, if you want to clarify that, what I think you're asking me is you want to grow green water like maybe like in a jar somewhere and then just feed that to your shrimps. Green water to me is like freshwater algae, like chlorella algae. Like people like grow like Daphnia or other similar filter feeders with. The problem with adding green water is as you get that into your saltwater tanks, the algae die. Um, they're not used to this saltwater transition, and they'll die. They'll fall to the bottom, rot, and attack your shrimps. Then the bacteria will overtake your shrimp colony. Um, and so that's why I use phytoplankton. Phytoplankton is already adapted to saltwater. It's pretty much the same thing as green water, but just the saltwater version. And it's one of the number one things that people use to, like, it's the base of the food chain essentially for pretty much everything in the marine world. So after my sort of 14-day death, I feed my fry green water and it works great. Phyto can be used in saltwater. Yeah, exactly. So I found that phytoplankton was number one way to get your shrimps all the way up until maybe day 10 to 14. Around that time, you really want to start feeding something else. So at that stage, I was like, I need to keep water changes going on. So once I start feeding the fry foods, like the artificial foods, like Hikari First Bites or powdered pellets that I crush up and grind up, then I start doing more and more. Thank you, Troy. Recommendation of Phyto was very helpful. Thank you. Um, I start doing way more water changes than I did before when it was just the Fido. Because one of the best things about Fido is they can actually remove some of the waste that your Amano shrimps can generate, right? So once that's done, I realized like, hey, I'm actually getting a lot more yield doing water changes, feeding the fry plankton, and so from then on, it was really a quite like a smooth sailing experience. And from then on I started getting more shrimps coming out until they're breeding very sorry, getting more shrimps, um, growing up and doing well. And then the next problem that I ran into was they did so well that I feel like they started overcrowding. They made more metabolic wastes. And previously, I'd just been doing water changes, from the water column. And so I would get these buildups of both algae and like fish food. And the problem with growing phytoplankton is the more nutrients you are have in the water, the more they grow, and the harder it becomes to see through your phytoplankton or see through your tank. And so what I did was I let the phytoplankton grow naturally, right? And I used the water changes to sort of keep them at bay or their population at bay. However, you still want to keep the water murky. You do not want to make it too light because at that point you don't have enough phyto in the phytoplankton will probably very not probably but very easily the phytoplankton will just disappear on you. And the filter, remember the filter is running all the time, and depending on how much bacteria and the pores in the filter, you might be trapping a lot of phytoplankton at the same time. So clean your filters if you can. Keep the phytoplankton, keep the water murky, but not choking out everything else. Um, and that was like another batch. I found that out another batch. If I had too little phytoplankton, the phytoplankton disappears. You don't see any phytoplankton under the microscope, and your water is clear, but then your shrimp start dying because they don't have enough food. So keep your water green. And then the solution I had for all of these like horrible rotting things on the bottom and to actually siphon that out is to get another container, and whenever it's time to water change, pour the shrimps into the other container. You can wash the old container to make sure you don't lose any babies. Pour it into the other container, clean your old container, and then you can pour them back. That was like something I found out for another batch, right? And if you guys have any questions at any time, feel free to let me know in the comments in the sort of chat box. I'd be happy to answer them. If you guys want to tell me about your experiences or what you would like to see more of on the channel, go ahead and let me know. And so at the end of that, that's when I realized like this is how you keep your water qualities up and high. Make sure this is how you make sure that your shrimps are happy and full and healthy. Because one of the reasons why you really want to keep the bottom clean is because as the as the shrimp molt, they are very, very weak as soon as they come out. You know, they're these tiny shrimps, right? And they don't have a hard shell when they first molt out. And what happens is the bacteria sees this and it's prime time for them to attack your shrimps. So you really want to keep the bottom clean. Now let me look at like my notes. I know that I titled this like, you know, keeping notes or like telling you guys about my experiments. Um, oh, and so at that point, I started looking for like differences between the different. Once I figured out like, okay, so this is how you actually grow Amano shrimps. This is how you raise Amano shrimps. You know, I had enough footage for part two. I had enough everything for part two, but I started wanting to look back and say like, what are some markers along the way that I can look at to ensure that my shrimps are developing on time or are healthy. And so at that point, I started doing a lot of filming under the microscope, looking at all of these different stages and trying to figure out what is the difference between day 1 and day 3? What about day 4 and 5? Is there anything? What happens when I notice that the shrimps visibly get larger? Like, what kind of different things do I see in every single molt? And so at that point, I was just like going through and looking through what do the previous people online, Hayashi and Hamano, they have some illustrations. Um, what kind of things do they say? What kind of things do I notice myself? So Troy D asks, what microscope do you use? And I'm going to take a look at microscope itself. I use this one, and what I do is hold the phone on the eyepiece here. It's a pain in the butt to line up the shot, but it is an Accuscope brand. It is the EXM 150 microscope series. It gives you 40 zoom, 100 zoom, and the blue one itself is 400 zoom. The microscope is actually the first thing that I bought at my very first job with my first paycheck, and it's a student version, like a high school, something that you would see at a high school. So it's nothing super fancy, nothing complicated. Overall, I think I spent about $150 on it. Now, if you want to get a microscope, I really recommend it because you can go through and look at like everything in your fish tanks, and you're just like, I can't believe paramecium actually look like that. And I think I have like a growing paramecium infusoria video on my channel if you want to take a look at what they look like. But when you're doing it, you really want to make sure that you get an LED, which I think most of the time the microscopes nowadays have LEDs, because the way a microscope works is, I'm going to unplug this so I can bring it closer. But the way a microscope works is you have the base and you have this LED light that you can turn on, right? See that turning on? So the light passes up through this little hole here, and you have a lens that can go back and forth and control how much light goes through. The more the light goes through, okay, what happens is the clearer the less detail that you're going to see, and the less the light goes through, the more details that you're going to see. However, sometimes you really want to get like a large, like a very clear video, right? So you want to add more light. But with you know what, I'm gonna try to backtrack and explain this again because I know I'm not making any sense. I'm just rambling. Um, the more light there is, okay, the more washed out your image becomes. But sometimes you want that matte washed out image because you're looking at the big details. You're looking at the bigger picture, if you will. But if you're looking back at like very, very small, minute details, you want less light because it gives you more, markings on the shrimp. Now with this is like sort of like the place that you put your slide at, and these little clips are things that you can clip the slide to. There are microscopes out there with like a bunch of dials on the side that you can, very, very easily control exactly where you're looking at. But I didn't choose to go with that. One of the things is this little thing back here that controls the light. It's called a diaphragm. And sometimes it's like an iris diaphragm, which is like you can move this and it looks like a camera lens. It'll go from very little to like very big. And other times it's instead of like being a lever here, it's a like a switch. So as you turn it around, it'll have preset sizes, right? And so either one is fine, does the same thing. Usually the one that I have now is a little bit more expensive, but I got this microscope years ago. It still works perfectly for me. So 40, the way you look at it is 40 is sort of the largest or the smallest magnification that you can get around. And so you look for your sample at the 40. And then if you wanted to magnify it to 400, go through the 100 first. Go through the yellow. So 40 is almost always going to be red. 100 is almost always going to be yellow. And then 400 is almost always going to be blue, right? And then you magnify it to 100. You make sure you have like the fine details of what you want to look at, and then switch into your 400. Because if you go straight from the red 40 to the 400, chances are you're going to lose the image. You don't even know what you're looking at because 40 gives you a picture that covers this much area. 100 makes this area bigger, but it's just this much. 400 is like this big. Okay. Now, because the way the microscope is, what happens is the numbers here are they multiply. So this lens, this blue lens, actually just gives you 40 magnification. This red lens gives you 4 magnification, and then the yellow lens gives you 10, right? And then this eyepiece here magnifies everything an additional 10 times. So at the beginning, when you've got 4 magnification and then 10 magnification here, 4 times 10, 40 magnification. That's where it comes from. And then down here, if you are looking at something, if you only had this, it only multiplies it by 10. With the eyepiece, 10 times 10, 100, and then so on and so forth. Now, my microscope can move around 360 degrees for better viewing, because sometimes you want to look at it this way, and other times it would be easier for you to look at it the other way, right? That way. Anyways, that is basically all I do. I just spend like an afternoon looking at things under the microscope, getting my, oh shoot, getting everything, all the footage for you guys and for myself, really. I take a lot more videos and pictures than I show in the videos on my channel, because a lot of times you're looking at specific things that they do. Like, I think for the part 2, I have a video of a shrimp actually excreting waste, and then I go ahead and I find the waste from that it excreted, and then I look at it and say, okay, it's mainly algae. So I know that at this stage, the excrement is mainly algae. The shrimp is probably mainly eating algae. And then later on, you're like, okay, it's changing colors. It's not as green, or it's getting more and more brown. So hopefully I can sort of guess that either it's developed its GI tract a little bit better, or it's eating different things. Let's see, where was I at? Okay, so all of this stuff that I'm sharing with you now is like what's been happening the past couple of months. There are other things like when I started growing phytoplankton, I had to experiment on how to grow phytoplankton well. And what I realized is if you're growing phytoplankton, you have to have number one, aeration, you have to have fertilizing, and lastly, the light. People say, 24-hour light is perfect. And in fact, it grows your phytoplankton really well. They grow really fast. But if you want to follow the commercial shrimp farming methods, the shrimps are exposed to light 14 hours a day and then with 10 hours in the dark. The, the problem is, I'm trying to grow everything as economically uh, cheap as possible. So I can't just put the phytoplankton in the shrimp in the same under the same light, which sucks because then I have to get another timer, another light. So what I decided to do was first try out growing phytoplankton at 14 hours, keeping the shrimp at 14. And what I realized is the first week it was fine. I could, start another culture, but the second week, as I started that new culture, the phytoplankton ended up all settling to the bottom. It was same amount of aeration, same amount of fertilizer, so something was wrong. And it took me multiple times to figure out, to remember that, oh my God, I had changed the light cycle. But the next time, when I finally figured it out, during this time, I lost another batch because I didn't have any more phytoplankton in there. But when I finally figured it out, it was the sweet spot is around 16 to 18. And I'm currently at 18 a day, and it grows perfectly. It grows whatever you want it to grow. It's 18 hours on. Um, I don't know what the math is, what, like 6 hours off. What I'll do is I will do that as the sun comes up and then into the night with, and then as soon as the light shuts off, it's immediate darkness. Another thing was that second paper talked about rotifers. Rotifers are used in the saltwater hobby for breeding things like clownfish with fry that are very, very little. It's like the baby brine shrimp, but smaller. The problem is, like, rotifers are really just, people don't use rotifers that much anymore. They use not flake, powdered foods because technology has advanced so much now that the there's no reason to grow rotifers anymore. There's fry foods that do exactly the same thing. The only reason why I had such a difficult time with artificial foods is the water quality. So once you solve that problem, you can use artificial foods without a problem. But I did try rotifers. I looked at it, and I also tried baby brine shrimp. The problem with baby brine shrimp is if you put them in there and they're not all going to be eaten, and they're going to grow. And baby brine shrimp, let me tell you, they are one of the dirtiest uh, things that you can ever feed because they'll eat the shrimp's food. They will poop a ton. They're going to destroy your water quality, and then they're going to outgrow your shrimps because baby brine shrimp grow a lot faster than the Amano babies, right? And then pretty soon you're going to have a ton of baby brine shrimp in there. Your Amano shrimps are going to suffer. The only way I can see baby brine shrimp being used is if you are at the late stages of, you know, growing the Amanos. They're large enough, they're almost ready to transition. You can give them that extra boost because baby brine shrimp, yeah, they're nutritious. I'll give them that. And it's also used a lot for the aquaculture business of growing commercial shrimp because the shrimp babies are a lot bigger than the Amano shrimp babies that we have. And they're able to predate on the baby brine shrimps without a problem. And so, these are things that I want other people to try too. Because right now it's n equals one. And if you've ever read a scientific article, you know that one anecdote, one person doing things, one trial is not a good scientific experiment. You really want to have as many people as you can be able to replicate and do the same thing, see the same results. Um, let's see. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to share was the bottom of the container. Um, I talked a lot about making sure it's clean, and that has been one of the most significant challenges that I've had to try to overcome. So if anyone else has any suggestions on how to keep the bottom clean, let me know. But another way I discovered that actually helps is with if you added a little bit of sand at the bottom. You have more sand, you increase the surface area, and so although you're giving more places for bacteria to grow, your shrimps are also going to benefit from that. If you have the Australian Amano shrimp, the Caridina typus is the scientific name. Their babies are different from the Amano shrimps. Their babies grow slower, and also they spend more time at the bottom. So they're able to, in the very beginning, graze on all the algae that were on the sand. But as you get longer into it, you're going to realize, like, how do I siphon the sand out, right? When you're siphoning, you can go down into the sand and siphon the sand out. That's what I mean. Sorry. You can siphon the sand out and just add a brand new layer of sand, and you're perfectly fine. Whereas if you had a bare bottom tank, the algae can stick to the bottom, and you're never going to remove all the dirt and the debris and the mulm with a siphon. So if you use sand at the bottom, great thing is increases surface area, and they're very easy to siphon out. So don't be afraid of siphoning out the sand. In fact, you want to do that and then add more sand on top. And that way you can keep the bottom very, very clean. Um, One of the things is if you decide to ever siphon, always make sure you siphon into a container that you can then hold a light onto, because if you don't, you're going to lose a lot of babies. In terms of assessing the health of your cultures, the most important thing when you're looking at health is to hold a flashlight up to the side and see how fast and how many shrimps will run to the light, because a health culture will immediately follow the light as fast and as far as they can. If you don't have a healthy culture, you're going to be waiting there forever and you're not going to see much. And that's actually another way of counting how many babies you have left, is just hold the light over and see whether or not you see a bunch of shrimps. Troy D says, I used a turkey baster and stir up the bottom and put the water into another cup to look for zooids. Yep, yep. That is going to be another good method of changing and siphoning out the bottom. And if you've ever tried it, you're going to notice that there's a lot of debris that can build up within a week or 2 weeks of being in the same container. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that I take notes, that I keep my journal for this breeding project, because in any sort of scientific or project that you have, one of the best things that you can do is to journal what you do, your thoughts, and the reasoning behind why, and then basically put that in a way that you'll never forget. And what happens is, after multiple tries, multiple batches, you start building this database of, these are the problems that I ran into, these are the things that I noticed, this is what I tried that worked, this is what I tried that didn't work to solve this problem. And the next time you can go back and troubleshoot everything. So this is what would overall look like a batch notes. In the very beginning, I will note the female, see which one she is. And if you don't know which female, if you have a group, it's fine. Just say, okay, I have one female. How big is she? When did you notice she was buried? And check your water parameters the day she was buried. Temperature, not salinity, hardness, KH, anything like that. Check as much as you can. And then next time, say, this is how long she was in the tank before I pulled her out to breed. And then at that point, you can, that's sort of like your initial thing, right? And then you used to say, okay, now that I let the female out, done everything, I put the babies in, what what is like estimate the amount of babies that you have. Okay, take a picture if you have to. Every entry, every observation, if you have a picture to go along with it, you're gonna thank yourself in the future when you look back and you're like, I forgot how many I started out with. I don't, I'm not very good at estimating, but if you have a picture, you solve that problem. You can do this in a Google Doc so you can access it on any device, anywhere, whatever. And then my screen keeps flickering. I don't know why, but the day one is very important. You make sure you know the pH of of the water, the salinity. You know the amount of phytoplankton that you put in, and you just look for like any sort of abnormalities under the microscope or by yourself if you can. And there's actually a couple ways you can DIY a microscope with just a phone and a laser pen lens and a bobby pin and some tape. It's really cool. I might do a video on that later if you guys are interested in doing that yourself. That way you don't have to buy a microscope for your own projects. But you document everything you know, and throughout the day, what you feed, or throughout the days, throughout the weeks, you document what you feed. And so a typical day would look something like this. I would have the date, how long they have been in here. Which way is this? The date, and then how long they have been in the salt water. Okay. And then, okay. And I'll go ahead and find some time to shoot that video for you guys if you guys want to see how I make the sort of microscope. But just be warned, like the microscope using a laser pen and a phone isn't as clear pictures for this. But if you're diagnosing something, if you're looking for a certain detail on a shrimp, it'll work. And you're not going to make like Oscar winning movies with it, but it'll work. And plus, it's just right on your phone, so you can actually record everything. Um, but where is I? Okay, so the date, how long they've been in the water, what are your initial thoughts seeing them today? Like, do you notice that they're actually a little bit bigger from the next day, or you notice there's not as many as last time, or something like what did their behavior look like? And then you document what does the water look like. You can look for ammonia. Test your water if you want to. It doesn't matter if you're doing enough water changes. You look at the bottom of the container. Is it very, very dirty? Is there a little layer on there? You document. The next thing you do is, what I like to do is I do a microscopic analysis section. What does the fry look like? What does the shrimp look like? Do I notice algae under the microscope? How much algae do I notice? And I'll accompany this with a video or a picture. And then after you've just observed everything, then you go into the next section of what did you do today to your culture, to your babies? Like, did you feed more? How much did you feed? Did you change the water? How much water did you change? What was the temperature of your changed water versus initially? Like things like that. Like, what did I do to change my culture? And then after that, the next day, or whenever the next time you get around to doing an entry, it doesn't have to be every day if you're not doing this for someone else or starting writing a novel on it. You don't have to do it every day, but the next time, do the same thing. Is there a problem? Did I notice a problem? Did I notice things dying? Did I notice more dead bodies, dead shrimps? And if you have circulation, if you just mix the water a little bit, sometimes you can see dead shrimps along with the detritus. So that would be a typical thing. I would have that initial blurb about my water quality, whatever, and then day after day, these entries. And then the most important thing, I think, is you make sure you very specifically document what you did to them, because sometimes you're going to lose a batch, right? And you need to go back and say, okay, the last time that I did something was this. And this is what I did. I fed a lot of food. I didn't change the water that day. I should have changed the water. I got lazy. And then you write a little blurb on what you think potentially caused that crash or that die off. And then next time, you go ahead and try to incorporate your solutions into it. And so that way, after a while, you have all of these journal entries on what your thoughts are, what you noticed, what you did right, what you didn't do right, what you can do better next time. And then that helps a lot more than, keeping everything up here, because I forget a lot of things that I do. I remember one time I crashed the culture with a yeast before I started writing these journal entries. I had a bunch of yeast, turned the water milky white. Like it was like one of my first times feeding yeast. The next day, obviously nothing survived. And I was like, I wonder what happened, like why. And so the next time I added yeast, I was like, I'm only gonna get a tiny little bit. The water still turned out a little murky, but I didn't get that die off this time. So like things like that, these are reasons why I write everything down. I try to document, take as many pictures as you can, videos as you can, keep them in a Google Doc, a little folder on your phone. You're gonna, if you ever go like talk to someone else, and you're like, this is what I've been doing, this is what I've been doing, check out all these cool things. They're gonna be like, wow, I did not know this was a thing. And my friends in real life have like heard everything about shrimps that they'll ever be interested in. And it's quite funny because I'm just like, guys, I'm so fascinated with this species. And we're just like, okay, but you can't even eat them. Another thing with the shrimps that I wanted to mention is if you are finding a problem and you don't know the reason for it, try to think about, like, imagine what they would do in the wild. So one of the things is these shrimps are washed out into the ocean, but they have really no say in what part of, that area that they're going to land in. Are they going to be full of, is it going to be full of food? Is it going to be, what salinity is it? What temperature is it? And so if you're like, okay, say you did an experiment where you didn't turn on lights at all and you just kept everything in the dark and you fed phytoplankton daily or whatever that you grow somewhere else, you're going to think, okay, what if these shrimps, I did everything else right, but these shrimps suddenly disappeared and they died after 5 6 days. At that point you can guess, like, okay, I changed the lighting schedule this time. In nature, and I know for a fact that these shrimps are very good at going towards the light. The reason they do that is probably because phytoplankton need the sun to survive and to photosynthesize and to reproduce. Phytoplankton are very good at going towards the light. If the shrimp go towards the light, chances are they're going to run into potential food, potential phytoplankton. So by taking away the light, what probably happened was, number one, the phytoplankton can't grow as much. They lose energy and they die and they fall to the bottom and they rot. The second thing is the shrimp might not know where the food is. So things like that. These are like, I think this might have been the reason why, but I'm not sure yet. The next time it's possible, if it's possible, I would test this out. And another thing is, if you're really serious about growing things and you don't, like, you don't get everything right the first time, change one variable the next time. Don't change 3 4 different things and say, okay, this is my next batch. Because if something goes wrong or something goes right, you have no idea what went right, what went wrong. And so that's one of the reasons why in some of my videos I talked about 17 versus 35. You want to make sure that you keep the same batch but just different containers, because even though it's the same female, we don't know what the difference is. This time they might have developed a little slowly. There might have been genetic differences, right? So keep as many similar things as you can. So we're almost at the hour, and I want to give you guys any questions that you want me to answer. It doesn't have to be with Amano shrimps. And just go ahead. You can ask me in the chat, anything like that. And if no one has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Okay. Well, like I said before, thank you guys so much for your support. I have a lot of different videos now. I'm posting like 2 different videos now, plus this live stream on my channel, all about Amano shrimps. Okay. Do you have any special techniques for catching the females? Um, when they're in the community tank, okay, when they're in the community tank, they like to hide. They hide like everywhere. Right? There's no reason for you to see them. You can't see where they are. But what I've realized is at night, if like in the evening or at night, if you drop some flake food or like an algae pellet or something in the front of the fish tank at night, a lot of times they come out and they start eating. So at that point, I take a flashlight, I look through, I look for the female, and you're going to see their eyes glow against the flashlight. But then you can net them out, and it's a lot easier to catch them. Now, if they're in that container already and they've already released their eggs and you're catching the female out, just go ahead, use your hands and scoop things up. Don't use a net because you're going to net out all the babies, but use your hands. And they're probably going to get away a couple times, but but using your hands is probably your best bet. Do you know how long it takes a newly hatched Amano to reach the ocean? So this is probably very different based on, where the female is, what the current looks like. However, I do know that if you let the female, hatch the eggs out, and then all of a sudden you just keep or and you just keep them in fresh water and you don't even do the transition, they die after about 5 6 days, so they really need to make that transition to saltwater within a week. um, but for me, I do not have any data on exactly how long it takes the shrimp to reach the ocean. I do know it, less than a week, or you better put them into saltwater at that point. Okay, well, the next time, guys, uh, I'm probably going to do a live stream on a different subject. Um, if you have anything that you guys want me to talk about, like things like setting up your tank or doing like a planted tank, or what my next things are, which, spoiler alert, I'm trying to breed like German blue rams, and I'm looking into breeding tetras because it's another like cardinal tetras, things like rummy nose. It's another part of our aquarium hobby that not a lot of people have really documented the process of breeding, and so I'm trying to figure out more of these things and to get that information to more people. But I'm going to go ahead and end the stream now. Look through all the other videos that are going to come out today or tomorrow. And thank you guys so much for your support.